You know that you can learn a lot about Jesus through his interactions with people. Let's point out, first of all, the kids. Here we are celebrating Mother's Day. The kids just sang. We dedicated a bunch of babies to the Lord. We're celebrating life. But how many of you know that Jesus, in a culture where they minimized and marginalized kids and pushed them aside, Jesus said, no, time out, guys, you're missing it. Bring them kids to me. And then we also want to look at his interaction with women, which we'll get to in a moment. But kids, how many agree say the darndest things? And so Julie and I are a season of life. It's an amazing season where we get to celebrate the reality of kids through our own kids. And our middle daughter, Marissa, and her husband, Brian, they have 4 girls counting, but they're done, they tell us. And one of Ainsley's teachers, which is their second little girl, she's 5, shared this with Marissa this past week. I think it was on Tuesday. And I want to make sure I communicate accurately. But after worship time at her preschool, Ainsley, their 5-year-old, returned back to class with the rest of her classmates. And they began working with blocks on spelling and building sight words. Ainsley chimed in during this time and said, quote, "You would think that when you spell the name Jesus, it would start with a G because that's what it sounds like, Jesus. But it doesn't. It starts with the letter J. And she said, I don't understand that. If that's the case, it's pronounced Jesus." To which her teacher said, that is how they say it in Alabama. So I don't know if he's Jesus to you or he's Jesus to you, but either way, I want to know the real Jesus, don't you? And that's what we're going to look at today as we look at how Jesus interacted with some ladies. And his interactions tell us a lot. Can I also say it's helpful to see everything within its context? That provides a framework. So Jesus, as we all know, lived literally a little over 2,000 years ago, which is in today's Israel. That's where his homeland was. His perspective toward women ran against his Middle Eastern culture then, and it still does today. If he were to step into the world of the Middle East today, he still would have to address the same issues he addressed 2,000 years ago. How many know some things are slow to change? See, women were often treated as property in that culture. Jewish rabbis literally began every temple meeting with these words. This is how they began the temple meeting. Some of you probably didn't even know this. "Blessed art thou, O Lord, for thou hast not made me a woman." No joke. That is how they began every temple meeting. What's that tell you about the mindset? Let me take it a step further. A wife could never divorce her husband. However, a husband could divorce his wife for about any reason, and this is recorded in the Old Testament, including burnt toast. How many of you ladies would have gotten rid of that dude a long time ago with some of your burnt toast? And legally, they could do it. Burnt toast. And the guy then had no obligation financially to care for her. The husband simply handed her a bill of divorce, and then she was sent away. Women were often viewed as inferior to men, excluded from public religious life, and rarely taught in the temple. Even in private, they really didn't receive much instruction. Here's the big idea that I want to communicate today, and then we're going to unpack what it looks like. Jesus defied the cultural norms toward women. Can I say it again? Jesus defied the cultural norms toward women. He healed and performed miracles as readily for women as he did for men. He taught both men and women. It didn't matter what their religious credentials were, or their social standing, or their lifestyle. He loved people and interacted with them in a way that was incredibly welcoming, men and women alike. And this included not just children, as I referenced earlier, but women, but thieves, lepers, prostitutes. Author Philip Yancey says this in his book, The Jesus I Never Knew. The Jesus I Never Knew. For women and other oppressed people, Jesus turned upside down the accepted wisdom of his day. According to biblical scholar Walter Wink, Jesus violated the mores of his time in every single encounter with women recorded in the 4 Gospels. So what did that look like? I'm going to dive right in today. I want to take a closer look at Jesus' interaction with women and see what he saw as he interacted with. The first thing that we see is this. Are you ready for this? If you're taking notes, you can do that in the worship guide you received when you came in. You also follow along on YouVersion. All the notes are right there. You just go in, 3D Church, everything you want will be right there. But here's the first thing we see. Jesus embraced women. Jesus embraced women. He was resting by a popular well one day where the entire community would come to get their daily allowance of water. They'd draw it out of this deep well. And it was the hottest part of the day when he was resting there, right over the noon hour. So nobody would come at the noon hour because it was too hot, number one, and that was the big deal. But a woman showed up hoping not to see anyone or to be seen by anyone because she's a woman, and this woman happened to be from Samaria. She was a Samaritan woman, and she had been married and divorced 5 times. She's now living with another guy. This is her 6th attempt, but she skips marriage this time around, and she was viewed with complete disdain, most likely, by most of the people in her village. So you have to understand, most people looked down on her. She was minimized, marginalized, frowned upon because of not only her lifestyle, many marriages, and now living with a guy and not married to him, but in addition to that, we understand, as I referenced, that she was Samaria, and that was a big deal. But here's the point. Jesus knew all about her, and he also knew her heart. He saw her need for much more than just physical water. She needed more than just to thirst her physical, or to quench her physical thirst. She needed water for her soul. And so she was a Samaritan, as I mentioned, an ethnic background considered inferior by the Jews because they were considered what we would call a mixed race. A mixed race. And Jews didn't talk to Samaritans. And Jesus was a Jew. Though Jews never talked to Samaritans, Jesus did. Here's part of their exchange. We pick it up in John chapter 4, verse 7. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" Unheard of on about every level. Jesus replied, I love this phrase, and if you're taking notes, you might want to write it down, you might want to circle it, highlight it, however you can. And listen to what Jesus said to this woman who was surprised that he would even talk to her. He said, if only you knew. If only you knew who it was that was talking to you. We built this whole series around this thought that if people only knew the real Jesus, you couldn't keep him away. You could not keep him away. And he says, if only you knew the gift God has for you. In other words, it's a good thing. And if you only knew who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you, quote, living water. Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again, Jesus said. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. Now, there's a lot we could pull out of this story and this text. I want to highlight just a couple of things. First of all, the takeaway from this interaction is simply this. Jesus lived out what he said he would do and who he said he is. He lived it out. He didn't just talk a good game. He lived the game. He lived it out, and he didn't come to judge or condemn. How many of you know the Bible says he came to seek and to save the lost, and he did that. We know John 3:16. How many of you know John 3:16? How many of you know Tim Tebow? Put it across, What's John 3:16? Somebody in the house knows it. Help me out. For God so what? That he did what? He gave his only son so that would have... Okay, some of you are reading from different translations. That's okay. I get it. Some of you are in the Amplified. It'll be next week you'll get done. But how many of us know verse 17? As well as we know verse 16. Because verse 17 reveals the intent of verse 16. For God did not send his Son into this world to do what? To condemn or judge the world, but through him the world might be saved. So that's great truth, but Jesus lived it out. And he did it with every person. And we highlight this woman at the well. Our series theme verse, which is also in John's Gospel, says, John 1:14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory and the glory of the one and only who came from the Father. I love this phrase, full of grace and truth. Every encounter Jesus ever had with people, he led with grace and then brought truth. He led with grace and then brought truth. He led with grace and then brought truth. And we're going to see that in all of his interactions with the people that we highlight in our message today. So back to Jesus and the woman at the well. They talked for a while, and she came to not only believe in him, but ran back to her village, talked to the very people that she was hiding from, persuading them to come and meet and hear from this guy named Jesus. And guess what? They all did. Here's what I want to tell you. If you only knew the real Jesus, you would run to him, not from him. And number two, once you do, your life would be so radically transformed, you inevitably, just naturally, would tell other people because it would live out of the overflow. And those other people would be so compelled by the story and the picture you paint of who the real Jesus is, they'd come running to him as well to want to hear what he has to say. So what happened? Jesus changed her from empty and searching to full and overflowing, from shame-filled to joy-filled. Now, to make it real this weekend and to really add some color to the message, I've asked my wife, Julie, to join me, and so she's going to help with the rest of the message today. So would you give it up for my much better half? And we're going to just... here you go. All right, so what we're going to do is just hopefully keep it really practical and real. And what I'm asking Julie to do, so babe, what I want you to do is just share with us the impact it had on your life when you experienced Jesus' embrace.
All right, so I wrote some things down, if that's okay. So that was easy for me. It's an easy question for me to answer. I was 19 years old, and when I was young, I grew up. My neighbors took me to church, and it was awesome. But it was a church about religion and performance. In other words, if you do this and you do this and you do this and all that. And so that was taught a lot. It was reinforced. But when I met the real Jesus and not the felt board Jesus that I grew up with, some of you ladies will understand that from the women's.
How many of you grew up in Sunday school? You remember the felt board, you know? Okay, reference.
And I loved it. But I had stopped going to church after a while, but one night my sister invited me to go to her church, and I could tell there was something different about her, and I wanted what she had, and so I went, and not really willingly, but I went, and I'll never forget, there was 3 guys. One was wearing shorts. They were very casual. It was pretty cool for a 19-year-old to see that. And they were all playing guitars, and at the time it was called New Covenant, and the pastor there, he was speaking about Jesus, and I came in that night full of shame, full of guilt, and almost really not wanting to be there. I was really uncomfortable. But when he talked about Jesus and who he was and talked about unconditional love, that just got me. I'd never heard that before. And it wasn't about do this, do this. It was like it was done. All I had to do was receive it by faith. Mm-hmm. And then the guys went up and they started singing these worship songs, not just songs about Jesus, but singing them to him. And I tell you what, it was like this shame and guilt that I had just melted off me in that moment. And I didn't understand it at the time. I was crying. I didn't want anybody to see me. You know, I'm like, what's going on here? But it's amazing, just the transformation, what happened in that moment. And I really felt Jesus embrace me for who I was for the very first time, and I felt safe, and it was just an amazing experience.
So babe, when do you say, because we talked about it, obviously, that experiencing Jesus' embrace is really the expression of receiving experiences of unconditional love.
Yes.
Like he just takes you where you're at, doesn't matter what your past has been, and he's not too concerned about what you're going to do to please him. It's just you and him.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So that was transformational.
And still is.
And still is.
Yeah.
We'll come back to part of her story, but it really sets it up. It's a perfect segue, because what you just referenced. Jesus not only embraced women that were pushed aside and elevated them in a culture that pushed them down, but number 2, if you're taking notes, he also elevated women. He elevated women. And in fact, some of you are well aware of this, but he... In this culture, you understand, where women were minimized and marginalized and put down, he lifted them up and, listen, gave them a place on his team, which was unheard of in his culture, that women would be a part of a religious culture and team, and it was amazing what took place. He included them in his inner circle. So to reference that, I want you to look at Luke 24, verses 20 through 24. It's just powerful what it says. And I just caught it, honestly, this last week when I was studying. It said, then some women from our group of his followers. So who's speaking here is very important. It says, then some women, listen to the inclusivity of the language, from our group of his followers were at the tomb early this morning, and they came back with an amazing report. We'll come back to that text here in a minute. The simple point I want to make is this, that Jesus elevated women. Get it here. We're talking about a culture in which women were put down and pushed aside and minimized. He came, not only embraced them, but he elevated them and gave them a place on his team. Now, Julie has, I think, some great references to what it looks like when you feel like you've been, good thing she dresses me, right? Come on, somebody. You got to like that. But examples of when you were elevated or included, in a team, in a guy's world. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah, well, I kind of grew up in a guy's world. I have a twin brother, and I have 3 other brothers. And so I was very involved with whatever they were doing out in the country. We didn't have computers. We didn't have iPads, and all that. So honestly, when I thought about it, I really felt included by my brothers. Because whenever the neighbor boys would come over, they always needed one more guy, and then there wasn't one more guy, so it was always me. And you know what? I really had a great time. And so we played baseball, we played football, and it was tackle football. We played basketball, everything. So there was one season where in our school where they allowed girls to try out for the little league team, because there was no girls softball offered. So I tried out for the boys baseball team, and my brothers were very excited. They're like, "Yeah, you can do it. You can do it." That made me feel great. Like my brothers believed in me. And so I tried out, and there was like 28 guys, and there was only 15 uniforms. And so we had to perform, of course. But so I tried out, and I got the 12th uniform of the 15. And I have to tell you, that was a great day for me.
All right, guys, let's put this in context. How many of you guys would have felt really like the chick just beat me out?
So some of the other things that I did, I was involved in.
Wait, I'm not done, babe. I'm married up. That's all I'm saying. Go ahead.
So yeah, and that just led to other things. I really loved playing basketball, and I loved track. I was a high jumper and I was a sprinter, and to the point where Illinois State University wanted me to be a part of their team, and I got a full-ride scholarship there. So I felt very included. It was really a neat time in my life. So
how about I love those examples. What about the church world or the religious community, where you felt maybe included and elevated?
So, yeah, when I had experienced Jesus' embrace at that time in that service, and I had after that, I always thought, man, if I could be a part of something like that, and be a part of, because I love music, I love the arts. Grew up singing in the cornfields with those little things. The cornfield was my audience, and we used to do plays for our parents. And
like when the wind would blow, it was like the fans were just cheering wildly?
Yeah, like they were clapping for me. I mean, I told them all this stuff. Thank you for that. So, I love the arts. So, in my previous church, I wasn't allowed to sing in the church, but when I came here, I just thought, Lord, if I could be a part of something like that and allow people to experience you like I did, I would be so honored. And so, I had been going to church a number of months, and the worship leader there was a guy, and he asked me to be a part of the team, and I was really like, wow. I came from a place where I wasn't allowed to, hey, will you want to be a part of our group? And I was like, wow. I would love to. So that was my experience in the church.
Okay, so this is significant because it sort of takes it to the next level. So the first thing we see is that Jesus embraced you. He embraces women. The second thing is that he elevates women. He gives them a place on the team. But he doesn't just give you a place and then sort of sit you there as fixed furniture. But the third thing, and this is, I think, significant, he empowers women. He empowers women. And in fact, we referenced it just a minute ago. I'm going to go back and read it. Then some women from our group of his followers were at his tomb early this morning. And they came back with an amazing report. They said his body was missing, and they had seen angels who had told them Jesus is alive. Some of our men ran out to see, and sure enough, his body was gone, just as the women had said. Here's the thing you got to see, guys, ladies, all of us. The first people Jesus talked to after his resurrection were women. Understand, we're talking about a culture where women had no voice. They were voiceless. They were silenced. And all of a sudden, Jesus stepped into a world where women had no voice, and he gave them a voice. And in fact, they were the first to voice or proclaim the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That, to me, is absolutely mind-boggling. It's remarkable because women had no standing in that culture, and they were the first to inform others in his other circle, the disciples, his followers, of Jesus' resurrection. They were the first to, quote, preach, proclaim the good news. So you talked a little bit ago about how you were invited to be a part of the worship team, but then as things progressed, you were empowered as well. So talk about how not only you felt empowered by Jesus, but empowered by his representatives. Because we're shifting here a little bit, because I think it's one thing for you to feel empowered by Jesus. It's another thing for you to feel empowered by those who represent him. So
my experience then was I was a part of the team, and I grew in that role to the point where I was in a church that empowered women.
Yeah.
It was awesome. I wasn't the only one. There were many. But as one of those women, I was given the role then to lead in the area of worship, which then grew to lots of other areas of the arts, like drama. I learned how to do video. But it wasn't just me. I was raising up teams, and it was women and men. It was amazing. We had a great time. I just love that. It was a great part of my life. But I'd be less than honest to say that there were challenges along the way, and some of them were pretty painful. So
let's talk about it. Let's get real. You were empowered, but then you experienced what? Resistance, opposition. It was like you not only felt it, but you experienced where people really didn't want you to have that role. Is that what you're referencing?
yes, definitely.
Yeah. So for the sake of time, let me just sort of shift then to the last and final point we want to make today, where we want to land this thing. Because as you can imagine, in a world where women were minimized, they were marginalized, they were rejected, they were pushed aside, they were pushed down, they were treated literally like property. To say that they were hurting would be a radical understatement. But then bring Jesus into the room, and all of a sudden he embraces women, he elevates women, and he empowers women. To think that in a culture like that, it's going to come without resistance or opposition, is like to just be ignorant. It's to be like close your eyes and turn your head the other way. And so I think that's really what we're talking about here. Julie was embraced by Jesus. He was elevated by Jesus. She was empowered by Jesus and his representatives. But there were other of his representatives that weren't so excited about that. And so maybe there's some of you that you can relate to some of the pain that's come with that. And so the last point I want to make today is this, that Jesus restored women. Jesus restored women. You can only be put down so much and not need to be lifted back up. You can only be marginalized so long and you need to be reinvited to be included. You can be empowered, but then experience the opposition and the ridicule and the shaming that comes with that, and you need to be restored. And so we want to land the message today with a powerful story from Scripture that I think is absolutely compelling and captivating. But before we do, Julie, I just wanted you to maybe reference, so even within that, how did you experience the expression of his restoration through some maybe painful experiences?
Well, when I first came to Christ in this church, they really talked a lot about having a quiet time, like time with Jesus. It wasn't just learning about him, but spending time with him, and talked about that. So, and getting in his word. And I love music, so the worship side of it was easy for me. So my quiet times, I would spend time with the Lord. I still do. And so when I went through these very challenging times, I mean, they were very hard. I just revert back to that same thing of just, I wasn't really able to, at one season of my life, I'd really trust anybody, you know, even Christians that were around me, and it was really tough. But every time when I go back in His Word and spend time with Him, He was someone I could trust and still do. And those times saved me. I mean, and He always embraced me, never pushed me away. When I went through those tough times, for whatever reason, I mean, when you learn who Jesus really is and He embraces you like that, how can you not love Him?
Mm-hmm.
How can you not want to spend time with Him? And I just couldn't get enough. I was a little radical. I just love Jesus. And so, but He never pushed me away. I never got angry at Him, even in those hard times, because I knew it wasn't Him. And He helped me walk through those times, and He still does. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, if I could say this, Julie, I know we didn't talk about this component, but, you know, she's just being really honest and yet somewhat vague, because we have friends from our previous church and all across the country that still listen to our messages. And so this isn't directed at anybody, but I can put myself on the spot. You know, there have been points in our marriage over the years where I've done some things that have hurt you deeply. And I think the thing that impacted me in an incredible way was a season that was dark and difficult that we went through that I was really the reason for. And I watched you, and the authenticity and the intimacy of your relationship with Jesus was absolutely compelling and just life-giving. And so I just want to publicly say how proud I am of you and celebrate your receiving of His embrace and it's made you to be. And you're an amazing wife, mom. Now you're a Grammy. And I just love to embrace you right now, but I don't want to embarrass anybody. So we'll let that one go. You're awesome, babe. Yeah, stay here. So to shift and sort of set up this last story that I want most of it to be told via video. Thousands of people followed Jesus when He walked the earth, and they loved His teaching. Most followed Him because of His miracles, and they had needs, and they knew that He could meet it and what He was doing among them. The religious leaders became increasingly irritated by Jesus' popularity, and it set up an opposition, and they had a plan, and their plan was to trap Jesus and to just really expose Him and take Him down. And so their laws, of which, just to provide context, because in one of the messages in this series we talk about Jesus in the Old, as in the Old Testament, and that was last week actually, and what I want to say for you that are just listening, you might catch that message online. We post everything there on our website, but I want to tell you this, that the New Testament did not introduce to us a new God, a new Jesus, but a new covenant, a new way of relating. Jesus always has been, He always will be. And so they were trying to take Him out because of His popularity. And so over the years, they accumulated, in addition to the 10 Commandments, about 700 laws that people had to abide by. And one of them was, you know, you can't commit adultery. Well, that's in the Big Ten. But if they did, the woman then would be stoned to death. Not the guy, but the lady. And so they intentionally went on a hunt. They found a woman, caught her in the act of adultery, and drug her to Jesus. And there she stood alone, exposed, vulnerable, shamed, waiting. And the crowd just began to gather and rally around, surrounded her. And they were pretty well equipped, and they were really ready to carry out what was legal in that day and literally stone her to death. Now, in that context, everybody had been hearing Jesus' message of love and forgiveness. And within the context of that, we understand that the religious instigators of this mob loudly said to Jesus, Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what are you going to say? So they had Jesus in a no-win situation. Put yourself in the culture of that day. If He gave her mercy and offered forgiveness, it meant that He winked at adultery and was an enemy of that which was the moral law. On the other hand, if Jesus, if stoned her, then all of his teachings about mercy and love and forgiveness were just all of a sudden nullified. So let's see how that story played out.